from what I remember. See, what I remember in Venezuela was like the very big infrastructure projects that were undertaken. The last ones that I have a memory of were done by Pere Jimenez, which was a dictator, Venezuela's last dictator, which ended up in the 50s. And then from there was a period of like, I want to say like democracy, and there was a lot of wealth, but there was also a lot of inequality. And these issues were never really addressed head on. Like I remember growing up in Venezuela, there were farms that had hundreds of employees and they didn't have a single school nearby. They hadn't built a school. They weren't really caring for their employees to go to school. So it was a huge divide between the haves and the have-nots. And what ended up with what happening with Chavez was that when he gets released from prison and he goes and does one coup attempt, gets caught, gets pardoned, does another one, gets caught, and then he starts his rebellion kind of starts picking up steam. And then when he gets the presidential pardon in 98, that allows him to run for 99 election. The second he gets pardoned, he flies to Cuba. And essentially, Cuba dumps all of their chips on this guy because they see an opportunity to get a guy elected in a country that is going to get resources. So Cuba just goes like, mission Venezuela, and they go all hands on deck and they train him. And these guys are brilliant. Mind you, Cuba has kept the lid on a communist country by expelling and essentially squashing every dissident for the last 50 years and keeping a tame base of people that can't even protest anymore. But what ended up happening was Chavez gets this huge intelligence and training from Cuba, and he comes in and he starts building crazy popular support because for the first time in a long time, he starts touring the hoods of Venezuela. Like he starts going, and there's one thing you have to give him credit. He started a revolution. His political party didn't exist 20 years ago, I want to say. He created it out of nothing. He was a true, I would say, social revolution in a way, in that he essentially forced his way into the establishment. And so I don't really see that right now in the U.S. because I do feel like the two parties have very strong backbones. And yes, even in Canada here, you hear a lot of the rhetoric, but in the end, it's really, I want to say the conservative or the long-term view, they dig their heels. The Senate usually will dig their heels, or someone who would eventually dig their heels, and they won't allow it to get to that tipping point. And I do feel that one of the moats, I want to say, that the U.S. has got going for it is this allergy that they have to anything communist or socialistoid related. They're almost like allergic to it. It's in their DNA. It's like they squash it. They're like antibiotics.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the genesis for my question, right? And because in the States, say what you will about various other aspects of society, and of course they get criticized quite a bit, but the Constitution is such a, as you were just saying, they're so kind of it's such an important document for them, and even though you could make cases that in certain places and areas and times it's been infringed upon or hasn't been held up the way that it's supposed to be, it's kind of that bedrock document that keeps everything else in check, which is one of the great aspects of the government system they have there. But I guess the reason why I was asking that question is because, like, I'm always when we talk about these big events in history, like if we go back to the 30s in Germany, right? Like, and you watch all these documentaries, you read all these books. It's not as if everybody in the population or even a majority was like, oh yeah, Hitler's going to take power and he's going to be this insane dude and he's going to run all through Europe and it's just going to be this horrible thing. Most people don't allow themselves to think things are going to get past a certain point, like it's gonna get so bad, and so I think this is what allows these big momentous changes to occur, because they sneak up and they sneak up and they sneak up, and it's like, oh, it'll never get that far, and it gets to the point, and then it either, like you said, gets turned back because of some sort of mode or some sort of resistance, or it just you wake up and it's past the point of no return. And that's kind of why I was wondering, how it transpired in Venezuela.
Well, there are very key moments in that process, to your point exactly, and going precisely to the point about the Constitution. The first thing Chavez did was rewrite the Constitution as soon as he took office. In fact, it's getting rewritten again for the second time under this new thing, the Constitutional Assembly, which essentially is Maduro's creation to rewrite the Constitution so that he can remove the democratically elected opposition party, which is the only kind of thorn in his heel, because he owns and controls everything else. And this is essentially the National Assemblies, where Juan Guaido comes from, which is all the turmoil that happened back in February. His newly created assembly, super assembly created by decree to rewrite the Constitution on his beck and call, was done so that it could supersede this body that Guaido presides.
Right. What's the sentiment of people to all these changes? I heard, I don't know if you said this or if I read it, but Chavez dubbed his platform, I think in early days, 21st century socialism. And right. Again, back to the rhetoric that we're seeing in North America and parts of Western Europe today, you see people trying to kind of legitimize socialism by calling it something else, something a little bit more modern, something a little bit more palatable to people, because you point out all these different places where it's failed, and they say, oh no, that's old socialism, we're doing new socialism, or we're doing democratic socialism, or we're doing whatever variation thereof. And I'm just fascinated by the process that people kind of took them, swallowed the pill originally because they thought it would be beneficial, they would get more services, support from the government, and then how it degenerates into what we're seeing now.
So I guess if I can describe the surroundings or the moments surrounding Chavez's first election, was that he was this new, socialist, try to kind of take the middle path. His platform, he would go on TV saying, he went to talk to like the top businessmen in the country. Like, he really sold it for something it was completely not. He went out and said, business people, I'm going to work with you. I want, we want to get you the visibility of labor that you deserve. But he was going to magically fix everyone and make everyone happy, and he had great charisma. He was just incredibly charismatic guy. So essentially, a lot of people were like, okay, well, these guys have been tossing the baton for 20 years. They haven't really done nothing. This guy really seems like he has a plan. And who knows, like, he may actually try something different. It was very much similar to like the closest thing I would consider to was Obama's election, which was this change, this idea that change was coming and that was a welcome change. And usually, I guess, what ends up happening is that, when you try to pull off a socialist government and things don't go so well, you run out of money rather quickly. Your promises, you can't make good on your promises because it sounds great that you're going to help everybody that's hungry and send everybody to school and build every road on the road, but you frankly just can't afford it if you're not just debasing everyone around you. And so usually what happens is you start not being able to deliver on everything, and people kind of call you out and they say, okay, first of all, this isn't working, and B, it's fiscally irresponsible, so let's kind of go back. But what happened in Venezuela was the second Chavez gets elected, oil rallies. And the feedback loop gets poisoned because all of a sudden you have a communist guy going on TV saying expropriate this, expropriate that, and then you have more job offers and you get more incentives, more gifts from the government. You get buy cars for cheaper. Everything becomes cheaper now. You can travel, and so everyone's like, oh my God, like communism is a solution that we've been waiting for. And that's really what poisoned the feedback loop. And everybody in there was saying, no, we're driving to a cliff. And it's like, I'm sorry, I'm too busy flying to like Orlando to see Disney or, go hang out with Mickey. And that's really what ended up happening.
Man, the coincidences of history can be cruel, when the confluence of factors converge and creates a false reality effectively, but, one that seems real for a period of time. I guess that is the story of history. But and what's your take? Or first of all, what do people in Venezuela? Because presumably there's still some people, a portion of the population that support the existing regime. Is that accurate?
100%.
And if so, how do they continue to do that despite what appears to be a failing state or obviously a very bad situation?
It's a hard question to ask, but I'm transparent and I call things like I see them.
Sure.
Do you remember when I just said that before Chavez, there were people that had farms that have thousands of people in it and they didn't have a single school?
Yeah.
So one of the things that Chavez did, albeit poorly, is that he built them schools and he built them hospitals and he built them and he gave them free food and he gave them free everything. And even though it was brainwashing, he taught things to their kids. And for a while, they even got computers. So like, there are millions of Venezuelans who literally did not exist until Chavez. They didn't feel like they existed. They were never considered humans. I want to, for lack of a better word. And so for me to sit here and tell you that he didn't change the life of people would be, flat out not trying to speak to him. I know that the lives of those same people could be much better. And in fact, a lot of those people today are the ones that you see walking out through Colombia and like a lot of them dying, trying to get out of the country. If you see their pictures, they're actually carrying the backpack that was given by Chavez's social programs. A lot of them are, which is ironic and really sad to see.
Right.
But you see the divergence there. They were the ones taking all these benefit programs, and now they're carrying them literally on their backs as they leave the country. So he did change, and there are let's put it this way. Let's say that he did this for 7 million people, right? Let's say 2 million of those people have realized the truth and left. Let's say more than that. Let's say 4 million people have woken up and said that. But there's always you're always going to have a radical group in every country of anywhere. So that base was always going to even just be there. But then on top of that, there's the guys who still have a lot to say. Things will be better. Things will come back. And think about this, right? Think about the fact that these guys had Chavez, had the greatest decade they've ever had. And now they have this guy who's saying, it's the Yankees, don't worry, we're just going to come back, we're going to bring the commander's vision back, just give us a little more time, just give us a little more shot. Who do you think they're going to trust, them or the guys that, were before Chavez to be like, no, don't worry. In a way it becomes, in Venezuela, there's a saying that says, mejor malo conocido que bueno por conocer. So it's basically, it's better to hang out with a bad person that
right,
than potentially try to meet a new guy that may be cool. And so in a way, it's a lot of, they're afraid of change. They're afraid of their social programs getting taken away. They're afraid of their homes that Chavez built get taken away, because that's what the government sells. It sells, if the revolution leaves, you lose your home, you'll lose your food, you'll lose your internet, you'll lose your privileges, you'll likely get singled out as a radical and you'll get thrown in jail. So a lot of it is fear-based and necessity.
How is all that being upheld in such a hyperinflationary environment? How are things even functioning?
Taxation by inflation is a very hard concept, and the government is incredibly powerful and effective at shifting that narrative away from I'm printing money to it's the mean business people who are raising prices on you.
Right.
And so because people don't make that connection that the government prints the money, and the government by design doesn't want that conversation happening.
And do they control the flow of information, the internet, firewalls, that kind of stuff?
Everything.
Mauricio, you should talk about the fatherland card.
Yes. So in Venezuela, there's the way they control their subsidies. Thank you. That's a brilliant point. There's this device that they could create, this control device. I believe the actual technology comes from Huawei. So what it is this card that has a chip in it that controls all your subsidy programs. And they're trying to do this. They're trying to essentially replace the national ID card with this fatherland card, which is essentially a subsidy card. And they're trying to force every Venezuelan to have this. And what this card does is that it is a census. It census you. It's a census, as in a way of it determines who you are, what you own, where you live, what you eat, what services you qualify for, where do you work, what cars you own, how many times you fill up gas, literally everything. And what they do with that is essentially every time there's an election, they will essentially go to you directly. And if they can't find you, they'll go to the person that gives you every subsidy. And if they can't find you, they'll go to the gas station where they know you fill up. And if they can't find you there, they'll essentially hunt you down and harass you into voting for their government or for the regime. And this is and it also has a GPS chip on it, so they can actually find you literally. And so this is all by design. It's a control mechanism. It's very much like, Cuba has done. And I think their game, Chavez's game, was always to, and I think this is very much encouraged by Cuba, is let those who want out. And in fact, encourage them out. He would, I remember back in the day, he would subsidize foreign university programs so that, well-off parents would send their kids almost, and it would cost them the same almost as keep them home. But to Chavez, a student was a very dangerous thing, particularly a smart student, because smart students question things, have a lot of time, they can lead movements, they can, inspire other people. So what ended up happening is he created this factory, or not this factory, he created this huge incentive for everyone to send their kids abroad, especially the families that could afford it. And of course they did, because it was like, okay, well, communism's maybe coming to the country, so why don't you go and get an education abroad? So if everything goes, if shit hits the fan, as they say, you can help us out and whatever. And that's what a lot of families did. In fact, I'm a product of that. I was the one that left, largely because I wanted to. My two brothers decided to stay because they almost chose to, but I was able to study abroad because of that program. And largely I'm now here, and I met the people I met largely because of that opportunity as well. But that was by design, because obviously I'm here now.
Right. But that would create a massive brain drain, right?
Oh, and it has.
That's a point, I get. Like you said, that they don't want smart people, but obviously smart people contribute greatly to an economy. So am I right in assuming there's got to be a pretty strong hand of authoritarianism? Because if you're going to control things so much, is there a lot of state violence against the people as well?
Oh, very.
And forgive the naive questions, but I try not to assume things. When I just want to know what the truth is.
So I'm going to tell you a story. This is not, and this is in the news. You can go check it out. There was a Venezuelan political dissident who, in and around the Guaido time, was taken in for questioning. Now, this is a guy who has been like a community leader, known around the community. He was a political leader. He gets taken in for questioning, and within 2 hours of questioning, he gets thrown out of the 10th story building, or he gets thrown out of a 10th story building of the authority. I think it's CPC, which is the Venezuelan investigation police, whatever. The guy gets thrown out of a 10th story building, and the declaration comes out saying that he's committed suicide. And so, and again, just going back to this thing, like if you think Jeffrey Epstein's thing is bad, like this happens in Venezuela like on the daily. And the other piece that's really
people
scary,
getting killed while they're in custody?
Oh, all the time. Venezuela, there's torture. There's people getting killed while in custody. There are people like literally getting harassed, like families of people getting harassed, like families of politicians, cops and police trying to like plant drugs in the homes of politicians to create scenes. There's no law really in Venezuela per se.
Do you have any trepidation about speaking out, given that you still have family in the country? Like, is that a concern?
I do. That goes through my mind a lot. None of what I'm saying is stuff that's not already out there.
Right.
It's public information in a way, and I feel that these things need to be said. Yes, it scares me. I like to think that I'm still low profile enough that these kinds of things, won't really get to that. And God, I don't know if I could ever forgive myself if anything I said ever went back to hurt them.
Yeah.
But I try to just call it like it is and do my best.
So do people, like, does your average citizen in Venezuela right now feel like their day-to-day lives is under the threat of violence if they don't comply? Or is it just kind of like, we have certain parameters for our behavior, and as long as we stay inside those parameters, then we're fine?
Yes, it's hard to say because, you talk to a few of my friends that are back, and a lot of them, just people that I talk to still that are back there, and they'll tell you like life's just pretty much just like you left it, like how's everything? We're like, no, just like you left it kind of thing.
Right.
And it's people adapt to everything. And I think,
Right.
I forget who was it that said this, but adaptability is a double-edged sword, in that you just can adapt to complete and utter crap. And so, for example, like the people that are there, they'll say things like, oh, just power rolls out. Power goes out just once a day now. It's only for 2 hours, and it's scheduled. So, I mean, that's great. And we get 4 hours of water, and 4 hours of water. We fill up our tanks, and we have a little pump, and that's amazing. And we also got this little power generator for when the power goes out. And then, we bring our stuff from Amazon, and it takes a few weeks, but it gets here. So, we're okay. So it's funny because you just get used to, harder and harder times. And it's a bit of a boiling frog effect, where, you were a person that were just trying to preserve your wealth. But then all of a sudden you go and you look at the liquidation value of all of your assets and, to leave. And you look at the harsh reality of having to leave and having to really grind it out. And you're like, I'll give it a year. I'll give it 6 months. I'll see what happens.
Right.
And life happens.
You're so right, man. I mean, you can. The thing that came to your mind. This is maybe too personal, but even like if you're in a bad romantic relationship, right? The complacency of just like, let's see if it can work out over the next 6 months, or like, yeah, we fight all the time, but I'm too busy to really do anything about it, like that sort of thing, and. You're so right. Like your double-edged sword is the best way to put it, because our adaptation is what obviously makes us, top of the food chain in an evolutionary perspective and stuff like that. But it also means that, like, we will try to make the best of any situation and put a positive spin on it, even if it's a situation that objectively should be improved or changed, or we should extricate ourselves from it in some way, or something like that. And then you layer on top of that, ideology and propaganda that literally impacts your perspective, so that you're not seeing things clearly. You're not seeing the reality of your situation and the options that you have, and the context of your environment clearly. And you have, that's a perfect recipe for, status quo, things staying as they are, or staying in a bad situation longer than you should. And Cuba's another great example, and there are several. Is it changing at all? Because what you just said, like your friends would be like, yeah, it's as you left it. Is it getting worse, better? Like, what's the trajectory of things right now?
So from what I've heard, there's been, Maduro is taking clear moves to get himself more hard currency. And because of the fact that he's been blocked out of the entire financial system, so the only way he can get dollars now or euros is essentially taking them from its people. And the smartest way to do that, so before he, maybe this is like a convoluted way to get to where things are today, but essentially Maduro has had currency controls. Chavismo has had currency controls since existence. Like, I believe that since Chavez came into office, there's been a currency control, and it's essentially been crafted in a way that it would show an artificially low exchange rate fixed from the bolivar to the dollar, so that it could inflate all of the local numbers. So, for example, Chavez had this, he declared that the exchange rate from the dollar to the bolivar was 2 bolivares for $1, and he set minimum wage, and he said, a lot of these, development measure things in bolivares. So when you did the division between two, it was like, oh my God, minimum wage in Venezuela is $3,000 a month. Like, oh my God, it's greatest minimum wage in the world. But if you tried to go and buy $1 for 2 bolivares, nobody would sell it to you. Right. Only the government had the right to sell it to you, because they control all the oil dollars that were coming in. So they decided who they gave these. And then the person that got them for 2 could immediately turn around and sell them for 20. And so what this ended up doing was, nobody was using the government to buy us in dollars, because they couldn't, it was illegal, but everyone was doing it anyway. So it created this like black market, or the market, that people dub as the black market. But when the government, I try to question authority now. Every time someone tells me it's the black market, I'm like, well, who's the white guy? Because apparently the white market's not nearly. They're way more crook on that market sometimes.
Sure. Well, the black market is the free market, right? I mean, basically, it's the one that without regulations layered on top of it.
So in Venezuela, for a long time there was this known fact that you would never sell your dollars to the government. Like, why? They were the lowest payers ever of your dollars. But what they've done now is, because buying it from people is the only way they can actually get dollars. And they realize, they're like, okay, well, whatever, screw it. If we can get oil and we have this printing machine just sitting there, why don't we just print bolivares and just pay ridiculous amounts of bolivares for people with dollars? Who the hell cares? We just print them, right? So they're saying, okay, anyone that wants to sell dollars, and they'll go to the black market and be like, how much are you guys paying for a dollar? 900? Okay, we're paying 1100. What's the black market? Oh, it went up to 1,000. Make it 1,200. Print some more. And it went up to 1,600. Print some more. And everyone essentially is like, oh, I'll take a couple hundred more dollars, more bolivares, and go to the government. So they're trying to, create this. And so in a way, they're doing this to sort of steal the hard currency out of the population, or trade mirrors for gold in a way.
Sure.
So what that has done, the flip side to that is that they've relaxed a lot of the foreign exchange regulations to be able to do this, and this has allowed businesses to essentially, and they've removed a lot of the price fixes on a lot of the products. And what's happened is a lot of the products are magically back on the shelves, because people now can make market profits on these goods and on the risk that they're taking. So people are starting to import things again. I guess if I could say, in February we were at it was terrible, but there was hopes of change. Now there are no hopes of change, but things are more livable. And as far as political things in Venezuela, I mean, I've become so disappointed and disillusioned with the way that that this sort of push was structured. I don't even know what to say about Venezuela sitting on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. I'm just completely embarrassed and ashamed to even have, I don't even know. I don't want to go down a deeper and say negative, nastier things, but it's deeply shameful to me. And so I have very little hope that any democratic solution will be reached. I think, if anything, in Venezuela, what we need is some sort of military black swan, to be honest, something that nobody expects, nobody can really predict, and it's probably brewing already. So I think that's really what's going to drive any sort of change in Venezuela, to be a military black swan event.
So it doesn't look like the Guaido, like he's going to gain any power or popularity or anything like that? He has it. They're just not going to allow a vote. Right. And what do you make of people in in North America and Europe? And I don't mean to single her out, but she's coming to my mind. Like, especially earlier in the year when Guaido kind of emerged, or whenever, I can't remember the exact time frame when that was, but and people were arguing like, the Western countries shouldn't support Guaido. He's not the democratically elected leader, blah, blah, blah. But there's people like, I heard Abby Martin speak on Rogan's podcast, and she's, saying like, she's very pro Maduro, right? Like, and she's also very pro socialist. And so she's, basically saying that the Western powers should not be supporting, a Guaido because he's he's not a democratically elected leader, and the people of Venezuela have chosen Maduro and stuff. No, I'm basically just saying that to ask, like, what do you think of people in these outside of Venezuela that support Maduro? Is that just, because they don't understand the situation, or is there any case to be made? It sounds like no, but I just had to ask the question.
I mean, listen, the people, I think people are very much attached to ideas. And I think people don't like hearing about their ideas failing or not working out, or hearing things that challenge their core beliefs. Because if I tell you, if you're deeply rooted in conservative values or socialist values, and I tell you that those don't work because of this example, That is a challenge to one of your core beliefs, and it's going to take you more than that one instance for me to convince you. It's going to be very difficult, and so I think a lot of people are in a way ideological lost causes, in the sense that it doesn't matter what information is presented to them, they're always going to think it's doctored, fake, not done right. They're just so, I guess, brainwashed in a way, or closed off to the idea that that their concept of government, or what do you want to call it, is just flawed. That they'll find every reason to tell you that this was because of the U.S. sanctions, that this was because they weren't given the time, that this was because they weren't given the right. I mean, listen, this guy, not only was he given the time, he was given the budget that no human in his shoes had ever been given. He actually was able to afford setting up a communist government franchise across the entire continent. Some of it still lives on today, and some people still say that they need some more time or fairness, or that it's okay for them not to hold an election. And so I invite anyone that thinks that Maduro has done things right, or that Venezuelans Venezuelans don't want this government. Venezuelans, if all Venezuelans want is a right to vote, and the last time that happened, and they were given free and fair elections, the opposition won by a landslide. So that was essentially the last time they ever held the vote, and that's all we've ever wanted since.
Right.
It's essentially the right to vote.
Yeah. Now, I've heard you talk about this elsewhere as well, and one of the main, so the gun issue in the States, right? Gun ownership was a very fundamental part of that nation's system of governance, because it basically is a check against government power, right? If a tyrannical government takes power, then the fact that the citizenry is armed should represent at least the ability to resist in some capacity, right? That's the idea behind it. And I've heard you say that gun ownership in Venezuela is actually quite high, but it hasn't played out in that way, So even though that a lot of people own guns, they haven't kind of risen up together to challenge state power. Like, why, and what's the dynamic there, and how do you see that aspect of things?
Yeah, so I mean, personally, I think it's a matter of a lot of people like this idea, and this is a concept that's been evolving in my head, and I'm certainly not a gun policy expert or a crime expert. All I can speak of is kind of what I saw growing up, and sort of my mental model on how I see this. And what I saw in Venezuela was a society that was heavily armed, not shy about using their guns ever. Like gunshots at people were drinking, and people were drinking at a farm, and then they'll be like, oh, let's go shoot, let's go do some practice shooting, and it was just like a normal activity. And like people would teach their kids how to shoot, and it was just like guns were normal, I want to say. And what ends up happening when things get really bad and protests start happening is that you'll see that guns are one. It's not about the guns, it's about organization. A disparate group of guns is useless, and not only that, but when you have a disparate group of arms that don't really have the leadership, that don't really get the chance to organize, essentially what ends up happening is, when governments don't turn bad overnight, like it becomes gradual, like certain things start happening. And as people see that, if you're sitting in a position where you have a lot of resources and call yourself, you're one of these people that are in this position to organize a movement, let's call it that, you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to organize this movement. I have 3 kids at home. I have a couple $1 million, and I'm going to just go put a target on my head. By what? For what? Like, I have a European passport. Like I could be going and doing trading or whatever, get a job and invest in a new business. And why am I going to expose my kids to this mess? Why don't I just take off for a few years and see what happens? And the brain drain starts, the capital drain starts, and as that happens, you start thinking to yourself, okay, who am I? I'm some guy who's like a private impresario that have a few guns and a few things. I'm not a military guy. I don't know military strategy. I don't have AR-15s. I don't have like smoke grenades, so you can never I guess the way I've kind of thought about it in my head is like no collective of citizens will ever be as coordinated or as well armed as any state actor. Like it's very difficult. And the best you can do is create this guerrilla warfare scenario. And guess what happens in guerrilla warfare? People get the fuck out. And it starts dying out and dying out and dying out. And guess who has more resources ultimately? Who can print the resources? And so, it creates this, what ends up happening is it creates this hostility environment from which people leave, usually to a better place. And so all I'm trying to say here is that there's not enough AR-15s and there's not enough, smoke grenades that are going to stop you if things get really bad. Your wife's not going to look at you and be like, yes, yeah, honey, go get the gun and like hit the streets, go save us.
Yeah.
It's going to be your wife and your entire family begging you to be smart because you work very hard all of your life to have all these opportunities, and you're not going to go. You shouldn't go out and risk your life to change a couple of guys that are clearly just criminals and don't really want to sit down and negotiate.
Yeah. Man, I hate to say that it's fascinating because it's real life and it's terrible and it's a tragedy, but just to analyze those circumstances where, there's an extremely bad situation, there's an authoritarian government and the citizenry is armed, and in which cases they decide to do something about it, in which cases they don't. And it seems like today, I wonder how much information affects that, right? So if we look back at times in the 20th century, even in Cuba or in all the countries where, or even in the U.S. even further back, like was the relative deficiency or lack of information actually something that allowed those sort of uprisings to take place more easily, or like because you're not constantly updated with information that's pulling you one way or another. You just get the message sent from whoever that trouble is coming and you better make a stand or else you're done. And things were much less fluid and you couldn't travel as easily and all that kind of stuff, and therefore maybe you had fewer options. Whereas now, not only is the government restricting and curating the message, so you're getting conflicting signals, but everything is updated in real time, and you can communicate with everybody, and you probably have more options for mobility, if not your own physical space, but moving capital around or information and stuff. And I wonder how much that inhibits, making the ultimate chess move, which is, a coordinated uprising against the government. Because, as you said, that's like you're all in with your chips, right? You're risking your life, your family's life, your well-being, and if it doesn't pan out, then you're done. And I don't know if we're in a time where like people are I hate to use this term, and I don't mean it as badly as it sounds, but like are we in a softer time where people are just kind of more willing to be controlled than take the risk of their life and their family's life to rise up against something? Like, is that a generational thing, whereas in times past people were way less tolerant of being oppressed, or is it some other reason why is there other things at play?
I mean, it's hard for me to say. I mean, it's hard for me to say.
Sure. There's no right answer, right? I'm just kind of speculating, thinking out loud. But you gotta, yeah. It's that's why I asked the question.
On the softer
right?
time stuff, I think the hard part for people, I guess I'll give you my personal situation, right?
Sure.
Like, I could have stayed there and thrown rocks and tried to organize political movements, but that probably would have wound me up dead.
Exactly.
And so what I think the problem is people realize that, you know, political like a country is a very complex system, and I think, there's a huge disconnect between. I mean, I guess it depends on your adversary. I think that's the clearest answer, right? Like if I for a second thought that, we were up against a group that would be civil and would hold elections and would allow, assembly of citizens, and do, what I would consider normal things, then you feel encouraged that you can change these systems. But there are certain systems, for example, like Venezuela. I would say Mexico is another example, or perhaps even maybe not Hong Kong now, or China, but there are places where being a politician is just incredibly dangerous. Parts of Africa as well, because to your point, it's usually, you want your politicians to be educated people. You want them to be smart. You want them to be, to have resources and to, or to come from, I guess, to have had to be responsible, people that represent you as a citizen, right? When you have that situation and when you get there and you realize that you're talking to guys that have military hats on with like AR-15s in the back, and they're the guys that you have to go up and do handshakes with, what's the use, right? Like, and I guess it also feels like, people don't have your back, right? Like if in Venezuela, for example, for the longest time, and I see this, and I say this right now, as a person sitting inside of Venezuela, who has been hearing for this entire year that the world is against Maduro, that, we're going to sanction them, we're going to get them out, to just hang in there, we're going to help you. And then you go and see Venezuela sitting in the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. You know what the Venezuelan government does with that piece of news, right? It dances around the country, and it goes on like and the state media, which is the only thing there's left, because he took out everything. So it just goes on propaganda after propaganda, and it just completely breaks you down. And what the government does really well with the resources, the Venezuelan government at that, is, for example, every time there's like the opposition starts to gain force, he's able to divide the actors by offering them things, right? Like he'll go and say, hey, you ex-opposition guy, why don't you go and say something really radical? Here's a couple $100,000. And it starts poisoning the narrative, and it breaks down the opposition. So I guess the big problem is, to me, the biggest problem was when all the powers got compromised into one, and that there was just no longer any checks and balances. It was just a disaster. And when the military gets in bed with the government, with the head of state, that's also like the biggest red flag.
Sure.
Like
Can people access the internet, like YouTube there?
Yeah.
So like information is still obtainable, right?
Yeah, it's obtainable. I mean, mind you, wealthy people can use the internet.
Right.
Not the and it's very much like they'll give you the free services they'll give you. It has curated content, of course. So any of the people that can afford the internet, I guess, can access it. But it's not that many people.
Man, as you're saying all this stuff, I'm just thinking in my head, like, man, perspective really is everything, right? Like you're painting this picture. And obviously the government has worked very hard to create this situation, but you're painting a picture whereby a lot of people in Venezuela think yeah, it's bad, but it's workable, and I'm willing to tolerate it. And then you've got the growing group of people, just back referring to the supporters of socialism in the U.S., where objectively their circumstances are far better, and they're almost more vocally opposed to the existing system than the people that are living under Maduro. It's like, wow, like it's just perspective is everything. It's incredible. But so one of the things that and maybe Adam will come back in on the conversation now, because we're gonna go into Bitcoin, but is Bitcoin like I've heard rumblings that like Bitcoin is being used by the Venezuelan government. They may be mining, that kind of thing. Is that going on? Is there any truth to that, or to your knowledge?
For sure. For sure. I mean, I mean,
So they're just
they're
using
active.
it. They're using it to kind of evade capital controls and whatever
They're
financial.
using it to they're using it to circumvent sanctions.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Essentially, and they're using it as rails. I mean, funny enough, we just recorded the show with Marty where we had talked about just that, and literally like the next week was when that article broke that like the Venezuelan central bank like had some coins, didn't know what to do with them, and I was like, I flagged it and I sent it to him, and it was really funny because I think that was like the day that the show went out, but I mean they took some of our machines,
Right.
so for sure they are mining, and. They for sure. I mean, if you look at, so I followed for a while. I haven't got caught up for a few, for a minute. But I was following the Bitcoin rate and the dollar rate in Venezuela, like both official exchange versus black market. And for for a long time, you see Bitcoin trade at a premium to a dollar. So a dollar worth of Bitcoin trades at a premium to a dollar. Sometimes to the tune of like, I think I saw like 70%. So almost like 2 to 1 at wild times. And when I first saw that, I started talking to a couple of guys that used to follow similar information. And I was like, this is clear that the government is printing Bitcoin and buying it. Like these volumes aren't your average Venezuelan going on local Bitcoins. Like this is a systematic effort to acquire coin. And it got around, like we just had a few private discussions and this thing was like building and building and building. But it just makes perfect sense that if you can just infiltrate the P2P markets with a bunch of inorganic cash and get, again, trade mirrors for gold, you're going to do that all day long. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what they've been doing.
Yeah.
In the back, and what by printing a lot of this stuff, they don't care. They're debasing everyone else, but at least they're getting some coins so they can bring in their next subsidy.
Right. Just to put a capstone on this conversation, because you were just talking about, or we were discussing kind of the role, the history of like uprisings against the state power, and as we were discussing that, I was also thinking, if you win power, or, if you win power and influence via power, that's probably how you're going to lose it as well, right? It's kind of this cycle where it just keeps on repeating itself because there's always a winner and a loser. And I think that's part of the reason, among many, why people are so excited about Bitcoin, because it may provide the opportunity, if the best chance perhaps, at peaceful revolutions, right? It's a revolution that nobody in particular owns, but which it has the potential to create revolutionary change without, firing a shot, as it were. So if change comes through this technology, then, you won't be able to point fingers at anyone really, because it's not under anybody's particular control. And so I think that's probably why a lot of us are very interested in it. Why don't you guys tell me why you guys are interested in Bitcoin, and then you can lead into Ledn, because I have a lot of questions about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I'll give my last spiel. One of the things I love about Bitcoin is, I guess what really got me into it was the fact that, in Venezuela, when I learned about Bitcoin, it was in the middle of this huge capital control. There was really nothing that, buying dollars was illegal. And I say this often, people usually loosely just suggest that you should just use dollars abroad when things go bad and when your currency goes inflationary. There's never enough of them around, first of all. There's huge problems with carrying cash. It's a huge liability. Bills break down and bills get marked and they start trading at a discount. In Venezuela, everyone walks around with a little pen and one of those little lamps because that's the only way. And taking a $100 bill is like the biggest liability of your life. So there's huge problems with cash. There's huge problems even if you have a bank account in a different country, because the transaction fees are ridiculous. And next thing you know, you're getting your bank account shut down. And places like PayPal are getting started. Even Adobe started shutting down services in Venezuela now. So it's a reality that Bitcoin solves a problem, right? Like in a place where your choice is a potential $100 bill that may be fake, or a kilo of sugar, or some satoshis, a lot of people are just going to go for the satoshis. And I really love this concept of being able to transport your assets and your well-being along, globally with you without having to ask the government to get, having to ask permission. So I guess that's what I really loved about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, what I think is so exciting is just really a similar point of the standardization that it provides. So what's been interesting on this journey is just how different everyone's experience with saving has been globally. And on our team, I'm the only one that grew up in Canada. I was born in Canada. All of our team is Canadian citizens, but everyone else on our team was born in a different country. So what's super fascinating is everyone's had a very different experience with financial saving, financial products, with banking, with the concept of money. And it's made me personally realize just how lucky Canadians and Americans and Western Europeans have been with what to do with their wealth and what to do with their assets, and just how to make sure that they have at least 90 cents on the dollar the next year. And I think just if I can lead into Ledn, we really have two missions, and that's to help more people save, and it's to standardize rates and services for financial services globally the same every country, because we can. And that's what's exciting about Bitcoin, is the asset, the thing that the mesh that puts us all together, is identical no matter where you are in the world. And that was for the first time that's ever existed. So
Right. And so how did you two meet and then decide to, to hatch this plan for Ledn? Because obviously when you get involved with Bitcoin and you're down the rabbit hole, you're just like, holy shit, this not only is this fucking awesome, but like there's so many possibilities, right? So how did you guys like hook up and then decide like this is the route you wanted to take? You touched on a little bit there, but if you could tell me the genesis story.
Yeah, of course. So I was lucky enough to meet Mauricio at business school at the University of Western Ontario in London, Canada, London, Canada, not England. And so that's it's a pretty big university just in Southwest Ontario. And Mauricio was one of the first people I met in business school, and we ended up being neighbors afterwards throughout university. So remained really good friends. And I got into energy right after school. So I was building and developing and financing renewable power projects really throughout my entire career post grad, engineer and business. And so that's kind of the technical background got me into the energy side of things. And then when Mauricio was coming back to Canada, in between he'd been back and forth a few times on different jobs, and we had always stayed in touch, chatting every couple of weeks or months throughout, regardless where he was in the world. And as he was coming back to Canada, he had been mining in Venezuela, and he wanted to continue mining in Canada. And I didn't know what mining was. Mauricio introduced me to that concept. I was blown away by this concept of converting electricity into money, and then how did that work, and why was there a relationship between usually it was the other way. You obviously spent money to buy electricity, and now you're taking electricity, it's converting into quasi money, or really what we obviously definitely came to believe is money. And then we set up a small mine together. I thought, if we're gonna, if we're gonna do a hobby, let's make it real. So we set up a company together and started doing mining on a small scale, and then just kept investing in it. And then with that experience, realized that there was just a complete lack of financing and financial products around this asset class. And so I had come from financing big infrastructure projects, and to me this was infrastructure. It was hard. It printed cash, and you should be able to finance it, and we just couldn't. And so through that experience, realized that Bitcoin itself was really the best type of asset that you could finance. It trades 24/7. It has a real market value. It's divisible. So unlike financing a car, you can't sell the door. If someone doesn't pay, you have to sell the whole car. But Bitcoin is obviously more akin to financing a stock, where you can sell pieces of it. So just all these great attributes made it incredible as a financial asset class, yet no one else was doing it at the time, and things were just starting to evolve. So we really looked around at different products. Within the first a couple months after looking into it, there was a few players did appear. So Salt appeared in the U.S. They had done an ICO, and then there was Nexo and a few others, which had done a great job at getting initial marketing off the start. But what we thought was, if this is really going to take off, it has to be done on really in a way that bridges traditional finance with the new Bitcoin community that was evolving. And so how do we explain it to, obviously equivalent of Canada's Wall Street is Bay Street. So how do we explain it to Bay Streeters in Toronto and try to understand this asset class and put it together in a way that is feasible for them to want to look at? So we really thought a lot about like bridging that language gap and putting together a company and most importantly, a team that could tackle this initiative.
And so when you have those meetings, whether they're with partner banks or with investors, people on Bay Street, whatever, are you laughed out of the room? Are people interested? What kind of reception do you get from let's say the legacy system that you guys have to kind of partner with to bridge these two systems?
I'd say, it's completely binary. It's either I love it, I'm excited about it, or especially at the beginning, you guys are nuts. A lot of times I'm getting, 9, 10, 12, 13% yields on real estate. Why would I touch this asset? Also, complete misconception around the volatility of Bitcoin. I mean, it is volatile over months and weeks and years, but on a daily basis, it's not actually that volatile. So if you compare it just on the traditional stock market and you look at margining, really different stocks on the New York Stock Exchange or Toronto Stock Exchange, Bitcoin in some cases is less volatile than some tech stocks. So, it was really trying to really understand concerns and kind of come up with ways to bridge the perceived risks.
Do you ever? Sorry, go ahead, Mauricio.
No, I was just gonna say we should comment about the new financing deal which is closed to coaches, because on that trend of marrying institutional capital with Bitcoin, Adam, you want to share some details on that?
Yeah, of course. So we were lucky enough to get connected with Arctos Capital, who introduced us to Colchis Capital as well. And Arctos brings a ton of experience in traditional finance. Their team put together a lot of equipment financing and alternative debt products. And they stumbled into Bitcoin a few years ago and started looking at financing it as an asset class and focused really on educating institutions about it. And Colchis is a really big lender behind the scenes on a lot of different fintech. If you Google their name, they financed Square Payments. They financed companies owned by PayPal. So they're a really innovative forward thinker in the fintech world, and to get them into the blockchain and obviously Bitcoin space was very exciting. So just spending time with groups and really working through the thought process.
Yeah, I saw that piece of news. Congratulations on that. But just for a second, back to those kind of initial meetings. One of the things that we as Bitcoiners always encounter is when we're talking about Bitcoin to people that aren't really familiar with it, trying to explain what it is. And, it's almost like, well, where the fuck do I start? Like there's so many different places you can start. So when you're, let's say you go into one of these meetings and people are not really, they're pre-coiners, let's call them, right? And they don't really get it yet. They haven't fallen down the rabbit hole. They haven't spent the time. I'm sure you've pitched it a number of times. What's been your most effective lead-in or way of pitching Bitcoin to people that aren't familiar with it?
You know what? I watched Anthony Popliano use this example, and I've repeated it, so I can't take credit for it. But I love his explanation of when you start a game of Monopoly and you open the box together and you know how much money's in the box and you deal it all out. And throughout that game, you can watch the money being exchanged. You don't have to doubt that money is real or not, or whether that transaction occurred, because you can watch the whole thing happen. So then if you just replace the people at the table and you just put a number on them instead of know exactly who they are, so you make it synonymous, and then you put it so that that can happen throughout the internet, and you don't actually have to see or be beside the person. That's been a helpful explanation to try to start with that. I think the hardest thing about explaining Bitcoin is people focus so much on the technology behind it, but the analogy I like to use is when you try to explain to someone the internet, you don't have to start with, okay, it's a complex network of fiber optic cables bridging transatlantic cables using TCP protocol. You say you can do your banking on it, you can check flights, you talk about the use cases for it. And the issue with, I always say, Canadians are even harder to explain Bitcoin to than, let's say, Americans, because we didn't have the banks fail in 2008. We have tap Visa. We don't, like, we complain when we pay $40 to send a wire, but other than that, things work pretty well as far as money's concerned. And people don't really look at, into how much is being printed and things like that. So you really have to talk to someone that's had a real issue with saving or a real issue with transacting money. They get it right away. And see that in the people that supported our company too. A lot of them weren't born in Canada, and they came from areas that had issues with monetary policy.
It's funny how in Canada the monetary system is under such less scrutiny than in the U.S. Like you go down if you Google the Federal Reserve or YouTube the Federal Reserve, you're going to get all sorts of shit, and there's books on it, and there's people talking about it, and Ron Paul, and audit the Fed, and where's the gold, and all this kind of stuff. But in Canada, there's almost none of that. Nobody knows what the hell the Bank of Canada does. Nobody knows how much the money supply has increased over the last 10 years. There's not many Canadians talking about like the conspiracy of the Bank of Canada, which is exactly the same shit.
Canadians are just, I think it's getting better, but just politics are not nearly as much of a discussion point. And then obviously monetary policy being a subset of policy. This is a quick tangent, but last summer, so I live in an area called Little Italy in Toronto, and Andrew Scheer, who's the leader of the Conservative Party, and may or may not win the election coming up in October 21st, was walking through Little Italy, and I think it was a party of about three. One of the people was his photographer. The other one was maybe his publicist or something. But if that was in the U.S. and that was 15 years before the presidential election, where that person could have maybe been the leader of the country, everyone would have been stopping. There would have been pictures. Like, there's just a lot less involvement in activism, and I think that's part of the big reason why. It's just a subsegment of that, but it's not discussed as much. So, it's interesting.
Yeah. So let's dig into Ledn a little bit. So, first of all, let's start at top level. Is this? I noticed on the site. I think the services are available to not only Canadians, right? Some of your products are available to customers in various countries. Tell me how that works.
Yeah. You want to take that one, Mauricio?
Yeah, sure. So when we first launched the platform in Canada, it was the market that we wanted to essentially get it right in a country where we knew that if we satisfied consumer protections and really the consumer protection, data privacy, and essentially local regulations as well, then we would be able to take this Canada brand, which is has been really, I want to say it's been a great brand built around financial services, given that the banks had, good standing throughout this whole, throughout the whole recession. It created this sort of, I don't want to say brand, but this bit of an idea of the Swiss banking of America,
sure,
in a way. So, and especially, me being a Venezuelan, as a Latin American people tend to have this, tend to hold foreign companies, namely from North America, in very high regard, because they understand the scrutiny that they undergo and essentially all the standards that they're held up to, which they not always feel are held up in their own local countries. So many times in places like Mexico, Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, when you have essentially, a local bank and then you have a foreign bank offering very similar services, many will opt for the foreign bank over the local bank. There's foreign favoritism, and it's very real. So we knew that in Canada was an amazing platform. This is where all of our network was, and we also knew that Adam and I, we had built our network in Toronto. We knew that we could talk to a Bay Street, and we knew that we could essentially bridge the gap between the language, and it was just a great global place to launch a company. And so when we did that, even though we were built in Canada and our entire team is here today, we knew from the day one that this product was going to be a global product, and we built it as such. And I think that shows because we do quite a bit of things differently than other lending companies. But when we built this product, we knew that when we took this internationally, we were going to be able to we were going to need to be able to serve clients with lower loan amounts more efficiently, because not everyone has 6.15 to be sending into custody, and so we knew that we had to be able to push loans for much lower amounts, and so we built all of our services in house. Not only because of that, but also that allows us to never have to share our customer data with anyone. And so when some lenders took shortcuts and they piecemealed some of the services, and they have loan servicing with one guy and AML with one guy and loan contracting with one guy, and that's 4 people that have that client's data. The client never finds out, but then you have these leaks, and you never even knew who had your info. So that aside, when you do that and when you take shortcuts and you end up overpaying for all these services, it becomes very hard for you to process small loans because you have to now marry all these pieces, and it creates a lot of technical debt. So we build the platform from scratch, end to end, so we're able to process. Right now, we're actually the company that processes the lowest loan amounts in the industry at 500 Canadian dollars, and that was very much by design. And what we did right after we got the product basically going in Canada, and things were moving, and we were getting some organic requests from overseas, we went right into Latin America, essentially, and we worked with Dentons, which is a global legal team, and we chose them because they do have offices in pretty much every market that we wanted to analyze. So we did a big exercise with them. We did this massive grid mapping out all the legislation in all the countries that we were interested in, and then essentially we figured out which countries we could offer our services to, and we launched. So right now we're live in 7 Latin American countries, and we have clients in 4 U.S. states. Our savings account is actually pretty much available globally, but on the loan side, we're in Canada, and like I said, 7 Latin countries. We have 2 European countries, and we have 4 U.S. states.
So for the loan product, for example, let's say you're in Peru. Are you guys in Peru?
We are,
yes.
Yeah.
We can lend to Peru.
So is the loan in the local currency? Is that what you get if you put up the collateral and you get a fiat loan?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
go
ahead.
No, I was just going to say the user can decide what currency they would like their funds sent in. Sometimes, in the case of Peru, you're allowed to have US dollar bank accounts. So they could ask us to send it in dollars to their bank account in a Peruvian bank, or they could ask us to go to soles, and no problem. Like we can do that as well and send them their local currency.
Do you need banking partners in all these countries, or are you just sending fiat from your primary bank in Canada and sending it to their account wherever they are, and there's a forex exchange, and how does that work?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So the loan is denominated in Canadian or US dollars, and then the disbursement is typically in local currency, unless, as Mauricio mentioned, a lot of people in LATAM do have US dollar bank accounts as well. So it's up to them on the choice. We are adding, actually, we can talk about that as well, but an excitement announcement coming up. We will be adding DAI stablecoin as well. To be able to receive loans in stable coins to reduce any banking friction.
Right. So right now, if I'm in Peru and I want to get a loan, then I'm going to have to pay the international wire transfer fee, right? It's standard.
No, so we cover that. So there's no unless your bank charges receiving wire fees, which most of the times, if at all, it's the majority of the cost is from the sender side. So with our setup, we cover all the fees to deliver the funds to your account.
Right. So I'm probably gonna preface the forthcoming questions with these are probably stupid questions, but I'm not super familiar with this aspect of the ecosystem. But I think a lot of people there's some apprehension about this whole world because people, in some aspects it sounds too good to be true. Not that a 3% or 4% annual interest rate is like wowee, in the context of the whole financial environment, but it's like I think there's an underlying uncertainty where people are like, where are you guys getting this new money to pay me? So if we start with the savings product, and we'll break into the other ones in a second, how do you guys generate the extra capital to pay me for saving with you guys?
Yep. Yeah. So I think it's first easy to talk about why is there demand for borrowing Bitcoin, and so that's we can talk about the industry reason for that, and that's really two things right now. One is that the Bitcoin community would like less, which is hedge funds deciding that they want to bet on the price of Bitcoin going down, and that would be borrowing Bitcoin to short it, meaning that they borrow it, they sell it, and then they rebuy it when the price is better for them, not better for the Bitcoin community, lower. So that's one use case for borrowing a Bitcoin. The one that is far more prevalent is the need for Bitcoin working capital. So businesses that want to make money get their returns in traditional fiat that run exchanges or any type of business that has a need for it. Like let's think another one would be Bitcoin ATMs. So they have to keep a float of Bitcoin ready to be able to purchase. But they may not want to put all of their working capital at risk in Bitcoin because of price fluctuations. So they will borrow Bitcoin, and that way they have it available when someone shows up to buy it, and then they rebalance and repay over time. So that activity doesn't actually introduce a ton of risk into the system because they're just borrowing it very short term to maybe max they need it for a day a week for that term. On our side, we are very, very conservative on how we lend it out to the point that admittedly, we don't make much money, if at all, from the savings account. And I say that because I think it's to have an interest rate that's closer to 10% in this market would definitely be a too good to be true scenario. And we did that by lowering the interest rate. The market did change pretty quickly. So at first, this was a very novel idea. Companies caught on to it pretty quickly, and then the market dynamic shifted where no one really thought of the concept of borrowing Bitcoin at all. The industry got educated pretty quickly. Companies like ours said, hey, this is great. We can provide the service to the Bitcoin community and advertise a rate, take the deposit, relend it. And then this filled up pretty quickly to the point where, let's say, a year ago, there was maybe 50 million of deposits doing this. Now there's likely close to a billion or more plus doing this globally. So there isn't yet a lot of the correct amount of high quality customers that can borrow this. So we're quite careful on how we do that. Now, how do you do that really carefully? You ask for collateral. So you can do it the traditional lending way where I say, hey, okay, you're a great exchange. Can you send me your financials? Can I do a very, traditional finance credit assessment? We don't like being in the business of doing that. We're not, we don't want to have a team where we have to look at the credit analysis of every loan and start to bet on the profitability of these companies. So we like lending where we ask for US dollar collateral. And we ask for people to put up, okay, you want to borrow, 100 Bitcoin. Okay, that's $1 million. Then send us $1 million, and then we'll send you the Bitcoin. And so when you do it on that really conservative basis, you don't get a high interest rate for doing that. So that's the safe way that it's being done today.
Right. And amongst the products that you guys offer, there's the savings product, the loan product, which is a 50% loan to value fiat, a Bitcoin for fiat loan.
Yeah.
And then there's the B2X, all of which we'll break into. But which is the most popular at the moment?
So we do have more savings deposits than loan collateral. So on a total Bitcoin basis, the savings account is more popular. But what we find is that savings account, I guess I can kind of break into the use cases for this.
Sure.
But we have a lot of users in the savings account that like to get onto it to test the product and get familiar with it because it's very low friction. So not all platforms do this, but you can deposit $1 of Bitcoin should you choose to on Ledn, and then track your interest rate every month on that, and just to see how the tech works and make sure that you're
3.5% a year. Is that what the
interest
rate is?
Yeah, and then so if you leave the interest in there for a year and you let the interest earn interest as well, so compound it, it gets to 3.6. So that's why we say 3.6 APY.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's the most popular, and then out of the two loan products, which is more popular?
The traditional loan product is today, simply because we just launched the B2X last week.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
And the other reason is there's an additional regulatory step on the B2X because on the loan product we're lending only and we're holding Bitcoin in collateral. On the B2X product, we're providing a loan, but we're also selling Bitcoin at that point of the loan being approved as well.
Right.
So because we're packaging that together, there's another regulatory check. So that's the reason that as of today, we only launched B2X in Canada, and we'll be rolling it out in select countries in the coming weeks.
Right. So for the loan product, having a 50% loan to value, I think that's pretty easy to understand. If the market moves, well, let's say down, then I think I heard you discuss on another podcast, if it reaches 70% loan to value, you get margin called. If it's 80%, then you might liquidate some of the position, right?
That's right.
So basically, if Bitcoin moves down 30%, you get margin called. If it goes down 40%, you get liquidated to some degree, right?
That's right. Yeah, the math is a little like that's the approximate math. It actually works to 28.5 and the price decreasing to get to 70 just on how the ratios work.
Right.
But that's very, very close. So that's right. And I guess the premise of our economics is our only economics are the interest rate and the administration fee that's charged for setting up the loan. So we don't profit from these margin call scenarios.
Sure.
And that's by design. So we want to make sure that it's your Bitcoin. You take all of the profits if Bitcoin increases. You also take the downside risk if Bitcoin goes down. So really this comes down to a balance of how far can we push our investors to get them comfortable lending this money, and the terms are a reflection of that. So as our terms improve from our investors, we would like to pass that on to users and keep this the best product we can. So, yeah.
So, I mean, obviously Bitcoin does sometimes, it's not unheard of for it to drop 20, 30, 40% over the course of a few months. And in fact, I think I heard that you guys on another podcast or interview earlier in the year, and you said you'd never had to execute a margin call, because Bitcoin we're just in the bottom of the bear market when you guys got going, and things have been going well. Now we're in a bit of a, call it what you want, a drop in a bull market or in a bear market. Who knows where we are? But I assume that you've actually had to do that now. Is that a correct assumption? And if so, any reports on how that went?
You are correct, John. So, we did. Ironically, I think it was only 5 days after that last podcast that we did do our first margin call. So, hopefully we didn't jinx the market. But it was something that had kept us up to say, okay, what is this experience going to be like for us? What's it going to be like for our customers? And it was far better than I think we envisioned. Not to say it was a positive thing, but the reaction we got from people was quite understanding. So there was no, hey, this wasn't in the terms and conditions, I didn't understand. I think what's amazing about building a business in this space is everyone using this product and using Bitcoin is very smart. So our customers are discerning, they understand it, they get it. They know how it's set up. And what we find too is we didn't actually, out of all the different loans we margin called, only about, I think it was 10% ended up selling a piece. So most of our customers simply added additional Bitcoin from other services, or what was great for us is they asked if they could move it from our savings account. So really, over time, our job is to get more people comfortable using Ledn for all of their Bitcoin needs, and having the balance to have Bitcoin stored in savings that's earning an interest rate, and then have it your loan collateral for when you're borrowing, and then having those move between each other is great for us, and hopefully great for our customers too.
Yeah.
So they just said, "Oh yeah, this happened. Do you mind moving half a Bitcoin for my savings to balance out?" Of course. So
And
that's how most of the loans went down.
right. Am I right in assuming that with the B2X product, I mean, it seems like it would be far more sensitive to market movements, right? Because it's a one-to-one collateral. So what is your approach to margin calls liquidations with the B2X product?
Yeah, so it's actually not one-to-one. So, how it works is you start, just to make the math a little easier, let's say Bitcoin's at $10,000. And so you start with one Bitcoin. Ledn sells you another Bitcoin by lending you $10,000 so that you end up with two Bitcoin as collateral with the $10,000 loan against it. So the end state of it is exactly the same as the loan product. So it's a 50% loan to value loan. It's just that you started with an asset worth 10,000. We lent you another 10,000 so that you have 20,000 of assets with a $10,000 loan against it. So what's great about it is it's the same underwriting, but it's for a different demographic. So the loan product is for someone that needs cash. The B2X product is someone that doesn't need cash but wants more exposure to Bitcoin.
Right. I'm gonna get you to clarify that again because I'm being stupid here. But what?
No worries.
So I want I want to use the B2X product, right? I send you one Bitcoin.
That's right.
Then you purchase on my behalf another Bitcoin.
That's right.
And add it to my account.
Yep.
And then you give me 10,000 in cash.
No, I lent you that 10,000 to buy that other Bitcoin.
Right.
So I guess it's easier to explain the basic loan product first. So the basic loan product, you have two Bitcoin, and you put them in our cold storage collateral. I lend you 10,000.
Yep.
And that 10,000 gets sent out to, you can do whatever you want with it. And then when you repay the 10,000, you can take the two Bitcoin and move them around as you please. So on the B2X product, you only have one to start, not two. I lend you 10,000 so that you can buy another one on the condition that you have to put both of those two up as collateral for the 10K loan. So I can't give you the 10K loan because it was used to purchase that other Bitcoin.
Right. So what's the difference? Like if I just use the 10K loan and just buy my own Bitcoin, and so therefore you guys have one of my Bitcoin, I've purchased another. So basically, what's effectively the difference?
So it's how much you start with. So really, in the example, I kind of screwed it up because I said you had two, and I mixed the examples. But in either case, let's say you have one Bitcoin, and your sole desire is to purchase more digital assets, or hopefully more Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so if you just had one Bitcoin, I can only lend you 50% of the value because you're taking that off the platform. So one Bitcoin is worth 10K. I can only lend you $5,000. So you can go and buy $5,000 of Bitcoin wherever you want, but because you didn't put up that Bitcoin as collateral, I can only lend you at 50% loan to value. The B2X, because you're agreeing to put the other, we have one Bitcoin, and I can lend you another 10K on the condition that you put both up as collateral in the loan product. That's why. It's basically, one is a mortgage to buy a bigger house. The other one is a mortgage on the house you already own.
Right. So you maintain custody of the two Bitcoins in the B2X product for the life of the loan, and it can be paid back at any time, right?
Yeah, and so what people are doing is, and this is like a bit circular, but you could go, put up one Bitcoin, borrow 5K, go buy a Bitcoin, bring the 5K Bitcoin back to us. Now you have 1.5 Bitcoin. Now you borrow half that, and eventually you'll get to the same point. Exactly. You'll get to the same point as B2X. So we thought, this is silly. A big portion of our customers are doing this anyways. Let's simplify it for them so they can do everything on the platform and do it in one simple step.
Right.
So,
and in the case where, is it possible? Are there cases where you would require more collateral beyond what you could liquidate, or would that not happen?
There's no recourse. So, I mean, the assets that we have are the Bitcoin you put up. So, that's how we're able to loan. So we're not doing credit checks
Right.
or anything like that to come after other assets that you own.
Right. So big, mantra in the Bitcoin community: not your keys, not your coins. Right
Yeah,
now,
of course.
I you know, I think that's a good mantra to have for security and for individual sovereignty and those sort of things. But I also think it's good that products and services are available should people want to delegate a portion of their Bitcoin assets to maybe get more interest or get a loan or something like that. I think the more services, the better, and then you get to choose how you want to allocate your Bitcoin. But so this brings up the issue of custody, right? Because people basically say, if I'm gonna lend my Bitcoin to you, what assurances do I have that you're going to give it back, or what are the assurances basically? And I saw from your site that you work with BitGo, a well-known custodian. And my question on that front is, so you go to their website and they say they have $100 million of insurance against their custodial assets, but it doesn't say how much, what the value of their custodial assets are. So if their custodial assets are in excess of their insurance, what is the implication for people whose assets, people who hold assets with them, whether it's via you or directly, via Ledn or directly?
Yeah. So I think first of all, why did we choose BitGo? So when we started on the journey, we wanted to do every single thing in house, and we actually built our own custody solution in Canada. The classic sharded, secure, and a bunch of different vaults. But we found it was an impossible, frankly, educational exercise to explain how our custody worked while trying to build trust in the financial services industry as well. So we looked around and we said, okay, what has a great reputation? What has excellent technology? What can integrate with our platform seamlessly so that we don't have to send our customers to onboard with another system? And that's really why we ended up with BitGo after doing a very in-depth analysis at who was out there. So at the time when we selected BitGo, they were the only custodian that offered insurance at all in the market. So I think it's a really good point on digging into the insurance. It is you are correct in that it's $100 million policy, and that their assets are in excess of that. So I think a couple insurances that we have is that all of our loans set up are all in individual addresses. So there is a protection so that there's not one central wallet at BitGo that if there was a hack, everything is gone. So already you have diversification on that. The other point I'll make is the insurance industry is evolving. And I think as they get comfortable with more, I do hope that they will improve it so that they will look at a total amount on everything. Just from my understanding, it is best in class that's available, at least for services like ours currently.
Right. And does BitGo actually publish their total assets? I didn't see it anywhere on their site.
I don't think they do. I know from a few different articles, I think it would be north of 2 or 3 billion.
Right. So yeah, so that's definitely. I mean, if the insurance is only 100 million, that's definitely something that people want to consider when they're looking at their risk, tolerance for whatever financial products they're looking to gain access to. What was I going to ask next?
Yeah, and there's a lot of different, obviously like anything, the devil is in the details, right? So one is the total dollar amount. One is the, at what situations is the insurance valid? So is it protection of a hack and theft? Is it protection against human error? So these are all things that, we think about a lot and that we've looked into. And again, it just came down to what is the best possible solutions that we can offer our clients, and best integrate with Ledn services, and that's how we ended up with BitGo.
Yeah,
Right?
I remember what I was going to ask next, and it was just that, in servicing international clients, what are your legal obligations, if any, to fulfill the terms of the insurance protections that you offer through BitGo? So basically, if I'm wherever I am in Canada or another country, if I take out a loan, is there any legal obligation if whatever the insurance policy dictates, as you just mentioned, if it's due to hack or something else, what are your obligations to pay me, and at what level are you obligated to pay me out?
Yeah, so I mean, if we on the loan side, putting up collateral, that's Ledn's legal obligation. So we have an obligation to our customers to pay their entire Bitcoin balance back. So the insurance really just comes down to Ledn's ability to recover funds to pay the customer. So it's an insurance on top of Ledn's guarantee already. So the customer would have full recourse to Ledn for not providing loan collateral in the event of a loss.
So would that be a legal resource, I guess, in Canada, right? That's the only.
Yeah, correct. So the customer would go, if we had a loss, you make a claim against Ledn, and then Ledn would claim against BitGo's insurance policy through that.
Right. And how is the interest on the loan paid? Is it paid, whenever you pay back the loan? It's just like you pay whatever interest has accrued over that time. It's not like you don't pay it on a monthly basis. And how do you pay it? So in Canada, would it come from, if the price of Bitcoin is increased during the period of the loan, would it just come from that, or would you pay it with fiat, or how does that work?
So the interest is charged on the fiat amount only. So the amount of interest we make is irrespective of the price of Bitcoin. It's fixed. So if you borrowed $1,000, your economics are, after a year you owe $1,140 because of the 14% all-in cost, with 12% for the interest plus 2% for the admin charge. So that's the total economics paid. We don't. It accrues monthly, but it's not payable monthly. That was something that we updated very early on because it was silly to be collecting interest. We want to make this product as simple. So it's one deposit in, funded within 24 hours, and then one payment really at the end without any early prepayment charges. So you can use the product for a week, you can use it for 6 months, you can use it for a year. At the end of the year, we would ask the clients if they'd like to be refinanced. So that's the kind of evolution of it. So it's intended to be a very frictionless, flexible product.
Right. But let's say, the price of Bitcoin goes up during that period, and I'm able to pay my interest owing on the loan just with the increase in value of the Bitcoin.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So yeah. That's totally fine. A lot of people will use these sort of lending services to avoid, tax events, basically, right? To get fiat for their Bitcoin without having to generate a capital gains tax. If I pay this, again, this may be a stupid question, but I'm not that familiar with taxes and stuff like that. But if I have a loan with, put one Bitcoin up with you guys, and a year later it's up 50%, I want to pay back the loan. I've got enough, in the increase in value of Bitcoin to pay the interest on the loan. Is liquidating some of that Bitcoin to pay back the loan, that's a taxable event, right? To your knowledge?
If you sold, yes, if the price of Bitcoin was higher than your cost base, and you sold it to cover the interest rate, and the gain was higher than the interest cost, then that would be a taxable event for the sale of that Bitcoin. So it's just all about your cost base and when you came in. So again, that at least how it would work. And under Canadian rules, everyone would have to check their own local tax, and these rules are changing like pretty interesting all around the world, right? I think it was Portugal. They're treating Bitcoin taxes differently, so it really depends on which country you're in.
Right. What's been the hardest part about this, offering this product and service for you guys so far?
The hardest part. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's been a lot of hard work, to be honest. But I think it's nothing has felt like it's been yes, we've come into challenges, but we've essentially all come together as a group and essentially tackled every single one. And I feel, frankly, I have to say I'm very happy where we are today and with the traction that we have and the trajectory that we carry. You know, I think the I don't know, Adam, what do you think?
I'll start with the easiest part. The easiest part has been our team. I think we've been lucky that the same people that we launched this with are with us and continue to add more and more to the mission and what we're doing every day. I think the hardest part has been really trying to simplify what we're trying to do, and I think. If I can go back to what I just explained on the B2X, is like how to get. I think what we're trying to do is really offer simple products and how to break down the explanation. So it's like, oh yeah, I get it. That makes total sense. So I mean, if I can explain B2X a different way, if you think Bitcoin is going up more than 14% a year from now, you should use this product on all of your Bitcoin, right? Like that's the basic on the math of it, right? But along that is, how do I know that you're going to keep my Bitcoin safe? What are my tax consequences? What is the, how does your platform work? What KYC do I need to go? So there's a lot of pieces that we're just trying to make sure that they're as frictionless as they can. And that's what we're trying to do every day is just like simplify. So
yeah. I think that's bang on, Adam. And I think I guess one of the challenge was that, I myself, I'm a Bitcoiner, I'm Venezuelan, but I carry myself as such, but I also went to finance school with Adam to Ivy, which is like, it's a very tough finance school. So I guess we all come from structured finance backgrounds, I guess Adam and myself. And as we were crafting this, and as we were building, in our journey through the Bitcoin industry, we were like, oh, it makes perfect sense to finance this. We should put this thing as collateral for a loan, and that, who wouldn't want to give us 14% money and take this thing on collateral? It's perfect, right? But when you tell people this, because we understand the tax implications and the benefits of it, we understand how structured finance works, so we get that the yield is good for them, and it also allows us to work and deliver a return. So we saw that the opportunity was there, but it's not as easy for other people to see that because it takes a certain level of, perhaps, financial know-how to understand that this is a completely natural product that exists in every other asset class. B, that it's okay to trust a regulated group that's going to offer the service and is a good actor and is not going to run away with your money, because unfortunately in the Bitcoin space we had a lot of bad experiences with previous lenders that just did terrible jobs with a lot of people. And even today I would dare argue that some people are still out there today defending that tokens are an enhancement on the lending experience. I would have to highly disagree with that. Just because I don't know if most people that are lending are really interested in owning shares in the random lender. So to me, I think that it's relatively new. Like this concept of a compliant, well-behaved, not afraid of regulators lender is relatively new. It has a few years out. The last set of guys that were grabbing headlines basically did a big FU to the regulators, when they raised their funds. So it's interesting to see that dynamic. So I do feel that it's going to change more and more as people learn about these products and get more comfortable with them.
Yeah, and so another question, kind of based on that, just back to the custody part for a second. Two questions. One, if BitGo has in excess of $1 billion, let's say, in custodial assets, why do they have only $100 million in insurance, as far as you guys understand that industry? And two, in both of your eyes, and And look, like I said before, I think it's good to have options. But what, and like you said, like if you think Bitcoin's going to go up more than 14% over the next year, then just on the math, not considering the risks, then the custodial risk, let's say, then sure, it makes sense. And then you just have to determine how much you're willing to put at risk and how much, but what do you guys think is the biggest risk of using financial services products with Bitcoin, where you have to basically give up your private keys? So, why not the higher insurance amount for BitGo, and what do you guys think is the riskiest part about, offering products and services like this with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I could take the insurance one, Adam, if you
Sure,
don't
yeah.
me, because
Course,
I think it's important to as a Bitcoiner, there's a lot of weight that goes into the insurance coverage of custodians, how they are or not insured. There's a lot of games as well. Not every insurance policy is the same. They are not all treated equal, and neither is every custodian. So, but I think the important, or I guess the basic thing to understand is, to hack a cold vault, it takes a series of physical steps to get there. To my knowledge, no vault per se in a cold storage setting has been compromised or hacked because of the physical element that it takes to essentially coordinate to bring together all those keys. What has been hacked in custodians and exchanges alike has been the hot wallets, because you need to have it automated. It needs to be connected to the internet. It needs to be API'd into and out of, and it inevitably, bad things can happen. There's a lot of code running around the hot wallets. So generally, what exchanges try to do is they minimize their hot wallet balance. It's a bit of a petty cash account, and that's essentially where all the risk lies from a hack and theft standpoint. Now, best practices would tell you that most of the people that are using BitGo as their custodian will hold most of their assets in segregated vault addresses. So from a risk perspective, the actual chances of an attack happening and that affecting more than one cold vault in BitGo are very low. What can be affected rather easily, or I guess more easily than not, is the hot wallets. But generally speaking, no exchange under the sun, especially given what's described recently, is going to hold more than $100 million in a hot wallet, or at least aim to not do that. And it would have to be a heavily sophisticated, and in my view, coordinated attack to get into even one of the BitGo's hot wallets, let alone 2 or 3, or even a cold one at that. So it's important to understand, yes, that we can all sit here and discuss theoretical risks all day long, but if you have a custodian that is a qualified custodian as designated by the United States, and they are custodians of gold and other things that are physical, very much like a private key becomes once it's in the cold, you would have to assume that these guys have met the conditions to essentially protect the assets of traditional banking, which should be, by today's standards, comfortable, because everybody else uses stocks and usually other products in other banking places. So it is call it the safest way, in our view, to store Bitcoin today.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the other part of that question? So that was one of the kind of the risks as you saw it, right? And the role of the custodian. I actually forget what the second part was, but so does that mean that your key management scheme, or do you have a key management scheme, or is it all just handled by the custodian? I guess it would be by the custodian, right?
It is by the custodian. Yeah.
It is by the custodian, but just to clarify, we do have internal controls to submit instructions to the custodian. So to give you an idea, there are layers on layers on layers that this has to go through to actually for anything to happen. So and that is by design. We take security very, very seriously. To Adam's point, I think you made this in the point in a different chat we had, but the day we lose the SAT, we lose the business. So we're paranoid and very much. That's pretty much our priority from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep.
Right.
It's to protect our clients' money.
Yeah, and I heard you say that also. You get a transaction ID, basically public key, so that people can confirm the balances of the funds that they have with the custodian. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
So what we do differently on our loan product is every single loan has a unique address.
Right.
So when you apply for the loan, you get a unique wallet address, and then you can ping out, public block explorer,
Yeah.
or if you're running your own node, and confirm that the Bitcoin hasn't moved.
Right.
So
I remember
yeah.
the last question. It was, why, in your guys' opinion, do you think the custodian would have, insurance far, or have custodial assets far in excess of their insurance? Like, wouldn't they be able to
Yeah.
get higher amounts of insurance?
I don't know for sure, John, and I don't want to put words in BitGo's mouth. So this is, I can only speak on our own journey. So when we were looking at getting our own custodial set up initially, and now, so this is many months ago, a year plus ago. So the market may have changed since then. But insurance was at least 1 to 2 points of insured value. So when you can think about running a custodial business where they're getting paid likely 20 to 40 basis points per year on assets under management, if they were to insure their total asset on that dollar value, the business would be a losing money entity.
Right.
So I don't think that's totally my own words, not BitGo's or anyone's against custodian, but that's just our own experience with the insurance market at the time. And in a lot of cases too, you're insuring things that aren't the highest risk activity. The highest risk activity is human error. It's human error in, copying an address wrong, and very, very simple stuff, or not protecting the private key properly by not having it in deep cold. So outside of that, it's I don't want to call it a feel good, because we do this is a separate piece from that, but there is a lot of insurance policies out there that do fit that description.
Right.
So.
Well, look, guys, you've been super generous with your time, especially on a Friday night. Last question is, what do you guys...
I hope that doesn't affect how cool you think we are, John.
Well, I think it affects how cool you think I am, that you want to spend your Friday night with me.
It's Friday morning for you. Who knows what you're up to tonight?
Saturday morning here, actually.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, but last question is just, what do you guys see for this? Like, what's your grand vision for Ledn, for the work that you guys are doing? What do you want this to become in the future? Just tell me your vision.
Mauricio, you go first, and I'll jump in.
I mean, I see this as, I mean, I would love to say that Ledn will become, if not some hopefully someone in our industry or one of our peers. But I think that for a long time, we've wanted, not we, I don't want to say something, it's going to sound very cliche, like humanity has wanted something very simple, but like, as I've, grown up and traveled around the world and had, moved around different countries, it would be really great if we could just have the same way now we have largely just one phone number and one email address that we do everything from. It would be great if we just could have one bank account and one global bank. One thing that always frustrated me a lot was that, if you open an account in an HSBC in Canada and you have an account in HSBC Hong Kong, they're not even the same bank. They don't talk to each other. You can't do transfers from one place to the other. It's like completely different countries, completely different banks. And all they did was just like lie to you, really, telling you that they were this global entity, but they were never really talking to each other, because Hong Kong people get some things, and Canadian people get some things, and Guatemalan people get some things, and it's always we're always playing favorites. And to Adam's point early, I think to us a Bitcoin's a Bitcoin. A die is a die. That's what it is, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. We can offer the same level of service. So I do feel like this is a great opportunity for us to build the first really global bank around the first true global money.
Yeah, and I think in order for the mission of Bitcoin to really become the asset that everyone wants it to be viewed at and get more and more adoption, you just have to provide more and more flexibility for you to do with it, and we want that process to be as simple and secure and easy to use as possible. So we have loans today, we have the savings account today, we launched B2X in case you want to access more Bitcoin. So more and more products that make it super easy to use Bitcoin is going to help us all out. So
Right.
that's what we're excited to do. Just stay on that mission. So
Awesome. Well, look, guys, I really appreciate the time again and putting up with my questions. I just wanted to make sure that I understood it, and of course, anybody listening, try to ask some of the questions that they might have for this product, because I think like I keep saying, I'm glad it exists, and that just so that each of us can determine what options we want to go for, how much we want to allocate to those various options, and it's good to see people in the space doing it right, with integrity and trying to preempt a lot of the concerns that people in the community and potential customers would have, and try to build that into the product and service offering. So I think it seems pretty clear to me that you guys are trying to do that to the extent that you can. So I think that's great. I think everyone's probably going to know where to reach out, but is there any destinations that you guys wanted to throw out before we shut it down?
You can reach me at adam@ledn.io. That's my email, and on Twitter at adamreads.
Yeah, I'm Mauricio at Ledn.io, and I'm at Cryptonomista, Cryptonomist with an A, and then Ledn is at Hodl with Ledn. So yeah, we're pretty active. We have a lot of exciting stuff lined up. So yeah, definitely peep and stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you very much. Wish you all the best in the future. I'll let you either get to bed or go down to the bar and have a few drinks and unwind. But yeah, let's talk again in the future.
Thanks so much, Sean. I appreciate the chance to chat.
All right, guys. Take
Have
care.
a good rest of your day.
Thanks.
Yeah.
See
Have a
ya.
good Saturday. Bye-bye.